I have the problem of getting numb toes when I ride. It doesn't matter if it's trainer rides, outdoor rides, or mountain biking. It also happens across multiple different shoes. So is this a shoe fit problem? Is this, he's mentioned some sort of illness perhaps that you guys have heard of? Something else? Thanks for the killer content, even though sometimes it feels like drinking from a fire hydrant. That's what the rewind button's for, and taking notes. I guess like the first thing we should probably cover is some of the I guess really the science of what's going on to cause the nerve or cause any sort of numbness, right? Because a lot of the time it's just, I've got numbness, I don't know what it is, and somebody throws out a tip. I've heard this so many times on group rides. It's because your shoes aren't stiff enough. It's because you've got the wrong saddle, or your socks are too thick. I've heard plenty of things, right? But probably best to cover kind of what's going on. Like we're talking about circulation, we're talking about nerves. And then on a bike, we're talking about specifically nerves that are likely somewhere involved within those triangle of contact points, the saddle, pedals, and then also your hands. And it's something that's important to be objective about it if you're going to try to solve it, just like you try to find a creak on a bike. If it's creaking somewhere, you go through the chain, you go through the cassette, you go through everything trying to find wherever it is, all the way back up into the pedals or handlebars even. So I figure we can probably just share some things that all of us, has anybody else here dealt with numbness while riding? I think all of us, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So we can probably just share some things that have worked for us perhaps in the past. Maybe numb toes. Let's start off with that. Who's had numb toes, and then what have you done to change that? Nate.
Ooh, and Chad. I had it like a hot foot once, and it'll occasionally happen too. I just put my BOA dials too tight. You can easily over tighten those things. That's been the fix for me every time.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say. The difference between one click on a BOA can be the difference between feet that feel good and feet that start to fade out over the course of a ride. And then I have high arches, so if I don't support that arch very well, I get those hot spots because my foot depresses too much and my forefoot spreads into the sides of the shoe, and that gets really painful too. So we have to support the shoe, and then of course don't over fasten your boas.
Mm-hmm.
I would say too, I mean, if you have the luxury of trying on different types of cycling shoes before you buy a pair, every brand has a different shape. And so usually you'll end up identifying a brand that really works for the shape of your foot. And that's a good thing to figure out if you have that available to you. And then the other thing that some of my teammates used to do, which kind of blew my mind at the time, but it sort of makes sense. And of course we were on teams where we would have a sponsor. So you would have to use whatever shoe was sponsored, whether it fit your foot or not. So some of my teammates would have shoes where they knew they had a hot spot, and it was, maybe just something about the shape of the shoe was really rubbing on one spot. They would just cut an X into the fabric of the shoe, just straight up cut it. And it would relieve pressure in that spot really effectively. And that's it. Like no more doctoring than that. Just like cutting an X so that it relieves pressure in that spot. And that was it.
That's that really on the inside or the outside of the fabric?
The outside, just straight through, all the way through the fabric.
Pro life right there, right?
Like that. And it's not. It's like, yeah. So you have a hole in your shoe, but honestly, it actually really works. So yeah, it's not the most elegant solution, but it's effective.
I struggled with numb feet a lot when I first started, and part of it was I had really bad cycling shoes that were really flexy, so that as a result I could like tell you the exact shape. It was practically like micrometers, like where my cleat was, because I could feel it pressing into my foot just because the shoes weren't stiff enough. That made it really uncomfortable. So yeah, I got stiffer shoes, that helped. But thinner socks, like I like really thin socks when I ride, and that usually just allows, it just decreases some pressure on my foot. Like Chad, I have really high arches, and then I also have high insteps, and then I get custom insoles by Sure Feet, not Super Feet, because those are like the non-custom ones, but Sure Feet. They usually do like ski boot insoles, but you can go to any place that does them, and you can get them for your cycling shoes too. Just bring in your cycling shoes, and the cool part is they'll go through the whole process and iterate and improve them with you when you're there. You can even have, like on mine, I really love in the specialized insoles how they have that metatarsal button is what they call it. But it kind of fills in like the hollow. If you're watching on YouTube, like we all have a hollow in our hand here, and you have a similar hollow in your foot that's underneath and just in front of the arch basically. And they have that little button there. So I asked them to do that. They even added that on. And since I've had that, I've had zero issues with my shoes whatsoever since I've gotten those custom insoles, and they've lasted for 3 years now. And they'll continue to last. They're bulletproof things. So that's like a huge help. And once it's properly supported, then your foot can sit well. But that introduces a totally different problem for me with BOA dials in particular, is that it has to take a long time for like the S-Works shoes that I have for them to break in. Because for a long time, because of my high instep, that the top like BOA lace will just like slide up really high into my ankle, and it's extremely uncomfortable and causes numbness there. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's like one big thing. Then the other thing, I had a really bad saddle, and that was also causing numbness before in my feet. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that, but my saddle was worn out and flexy. So it was like a suspension component on my road bike. And once I changed that out, it was much better. What about numb fingers? That's like a common one for people. Has anybody experienced numbness with their fingers here?
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Amber, what have you done to change that?
I didn't have to do a whole lot, but often, especially when my hands get cold, I'm a little bit more susceptible to this, but I usually get it when I'm really not moving my hand position. So I'm just sitting with a lot of pressure on the tops of the bars, and I'm not moving between the tops, the hoods, and the drops. And I'll usually lose sensation in my pinky and my ring finger when I do that. One of the things that really helped me early on, a bike fitter showed me this trick, and I'll just share it. A lot of women have smaller hands, and it makes it a little bit awkward sometimes to reach around to the shift paddles and the brakes. And there are often situations where you want to have your fingers on the shifters to shift, at any given moment. And if your wrists have to be at a really awkward angle, that could be a problem. So if you have smaller hands and you're having trouble reaching the shift paddles or the brakes, in many models of shifter, you can actually pull the shifter in toward the bar and stick a furniture pad in the top, and it'll actually hold the paddle closer to the handlebar. You might have to adjust your cable tension and your brakes to make sure to accommodate for that. But it's a really nice way to you can have a much more comfortable grip on the handlebar. And especially if you're a newer rider and you're a little bit less sure of yourself on the bike, being able to have your finger on that brake at all times is a real confidence booster. So that's something that you can try if you have a hard time with that.
Shimano and SRAM, a lot of them have reach adjust as well, so that you can, it's hidden somewhere up in the shifter, but you can put an Allen key in there and then change something so that it brings them in closer to your fingers, because that's a huge help.
Totally worth it.
I've noticed with gloves, I can have gloves that are too tight on a particular portion of my hand, and then that causes numbness. But then probably the biggest culprit I've had is wrist angle. Like, it's just not the right angle, and I'm there, like you kind of said, Amber, for too long. Even like I have on my Venge, I have the S-Works Aerofly 2, I think is the handlebar. And I just don't love the ergos on that bar. It's fine, but I don't love it. When I ride my NVSES aero bars, those things, I never get wrist issues. They have like a slight flare. It's just a little bit more comfortable. And with the Specialized ones, I can never quite get the same level of comfort. And the same thing with mountain bike bars. I had True Vative handlebars, and I swear that they were just like a round bar, and that was like it. Like, there was no shape to them. But handlebars should have something called sweep, and they should have something called rise. And sweep is how far and this is for flat bars, but how they come back to you. So in other words, the handlebar isn't just straight, but it also comes back to you. And then rise is the angle at which they also come up from the center of the handlebars. So they should be coming up at an angle, and they should be coming back to you at an angle. It's not severe, but it's something that really does help your wrists, because otherwise your wrists end up being in a very strangely cocked position where your thumb is kind of pressing into your wrist, and it causes a ton of numbness. So testing out handlebars is hugely helpful for that, and getting ones that are less springy too, because they'll be less abusive and dampen things up. It makes a huge difference. And the final thing I would say for mountain bikes too, at least, is togs. Those little, they're like basically like bar ends in the sense that it gives you a different hand position, but it's just a tiny thing on the inside of your grip. It pokes up like a tiny little horn, like this tall, and then that just allows you to like anchor your thumbs on something, because most of us ride thumbs over. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see when we're just cruising and relaxing, because it's more comfortable, and a lot of the time you'll do that, but it's never secure. And I've had a crash before where I was up there and then I hit a bump and I wasn't being diligent, and then my hand slipped off and it was a terrible crash. So those togs can just they do wonders for being able to just hold on to a position without a lot of contraction or anything else like that. Is there anything else that anybody's done for wrists or hands?
With hands, the only time I get numb fingers is typically when I do low intensity work. And that's just because the weight distribution, which is usually pretty even between the three contact points, shifts a little more away from the feet to the crotch and to the hands.
Yeah, and undercarriage numbness is many times I find that very thing too. Easier rides, like they're much more uncomfortable many times than a harder ride because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and the fix is basically in line with what Amber suggested, to just change your hand position pretty frequently. And in case of, your undercarriage, get in and out of get out of the saddle every now and again.
For sure. If you like this video, you should subscribe to our channel. Maybe even give this video a like with a thumbs up and a comment down below.
If you want to see race analysis videos, you can click on it right over here. And if you want to get your coaching questions answered, you can click on it right over here.
And if you want to become a faster cyclist, which you should go over to TrainerRoad.com. It'll make you faster. We promise. We guarantee it, right, Nate?
Guaranteed. Or your money back.
Yes, it's true, actually. We really will do that.
Yeah.